Hello and welcome to a how-to video from RC Empire, and welcome to part 2 of the restoration of our 1988 Kyosho RS-200. In this video we will be working through a full strip down and respray of this body. We will be showing you not only the tools and techniques we use, but also the issues we encounter and how to rectify them. And we have left these issues and problems in our videos just to show you what to look out for and what to avoid when you're respraying your own shells. So let's get straight into this. As we saw in the unboxing video, this body is in a very rough state, and of course it would have been easier to throw it away and buy a new one, but with these older models already hard to come by, it would be a real shame to lose this original shell. Now, one of the difficulties with this restoration is first stripping off this old paint. As you can see, not only is the shell delicate and already cracked, but there are at least 3 different types of paint on it, and some of them do not look like model paint. You can also see that whoever sprayed this the second or third time round sprayed over dirt and mud, so you're left with a hardened composite of mud fibers and paint, which in some areas is like concrete. So, what we are primarily using to remove the paint is Nitro Fuel. The great thing about this is that it will not damage the plastic, unlike, for example, thinners which will melt the plastic. So what you want to do is get a hard bristled brush and apply Nitro Fuel onto the body. Put a good amount on and spread it all over. As the fuel reacts with the paint will start bubbling up and loosen. After a few minutes, the paint should start bubbling up and loosen. As you can see, it's just lifting off with the brush with minimal effort for now. And basically, you just want to continue applying the Nitro Fuel, letting it weaken up the old paint, and you can also agitate the surface with the bristles of the brush, just to loosen off the tough stuff. And then using a rag, again with some Nitro Fuel on it, wipe off the old paint and start again. And do this until all the paint is removed. As you can see, there are areas of the paint that look like they could be household paint or anything, and for this tougher paint I actually brushed brake fluid onto it and left it for a couple of hours to bubble up, and this really took some effort to remove. And also a quick shout out for some of our followers over on Instagram who helped us out with this idea. As you can see with this black paint, after applying the Nitro Fuel for a few minutes, this is exactly what we would hope to see, and this will easily wipe off with a rag. And eventually, after a load of scrubbing and rubbing, you will get a nice clean body like this. And note, importantly, that we have managed to preserve the original stickers on the outside. Now, one thing that you can see is this almost cloudy layer of plastic, and this is a very thin layer on the inside of the shell. I think this is a reaction from one of the old paints used, as it seems to follow the areas where the old paint was. Now, you will see later on the importance of removing this cloudy layer and the positive effect removing it has on the final finish. So to remove it, I got a clean cloth and a very fine grit polishing compound and slowly rubbed away at the plastic just to remove an ever so thin top layer from the inside of the shell. And you can see this little clear patch here where I've done that, and it's come out very good, like a new shell. Don't use aggressive compound because you might end up scratching the plastic surface even worse and giving it a scratched look. You just want to use a very fine compound. In this case I actually used T-cut, but I only did this for a small area and should have done the whole shell, as you'll see in the results later on. Okay, so once your shell is stripped back, you can start masking up the areas you want to paint. So the first area we will be doing are the black ones, and these will be our vents. And this is where we have our first issue. What we have used here to mask up the areas is cheap general purpose masking tape, but at the back we have also used our proper Tamiya tape. What you should use to tape off areas where there will be a paint line is professional tape like the Tamiya we have used, and you'll see why in a minute. On the back here you can see we have used this 6mm Tamiya tape to mask off the rear vents and the grills, and also this nice long black area in the middle where the number plate would normally go. We've also used our tweezers to really get the tape into these difficult gaps and corners, and that little effort will give us an excellent look later on. Okay, so once you are happy with your masking, you can move on to spraying. For this model we will be using our airbrush, Humbrol enamel paint and thinners to thin down the paint for the airbrush. I'm at a bit of an awkward angle, but what you want to do is to take the airbrush and using long strokes start applying the paint in a very thin layer and slowly building it up. Each layer should be thick enough that it lands on the plastic and combined with the plastic in itself, and you don't want the particles to be too dry as they land on the plastic because they'll just stay like dust on the surface and won't flow or stick nicely. You don't want the paint to be too thick or to spray too much in one spot at a time because it might drip, and you want to build up nice even layers with minimal orange peel. And we'll see more of this painting on larger areas later on. Again, I'm in a bit of an awkward position trying to spray around the camera, but try to spray in nice straight lines with about a 50% overlap on each stroke if you can, and then let the paint dry between each layer just enough so that it's tacky, and then go again for the next layer. And for the black, we'll be layering it up until we can't see much light through it. And you can also see we've used newspaper and masking tape to tape up the open clear areas so we don't get overspray and need to do extra work cleaning it up later. Now this is where our bad tape comes in and ruins the day. As you can see, even though we have pushed the edges of the tape down, we have got this paint bleeding underneath the tape. And as you'll see, this is happening all over the car. Now, as expected, there are a couple of areas which need touching up, and I'm going to use this stumpy brush for two things. Firstly, we're going to use it to fill up these areas of black paint where the masking tape has covered the plastic, and you can use any precise brush for this, as we'll see later on. But we can also use this little brush as a rubber or as an eraser. So dip it into a little bit of Nitro Fuel and very slightly start rubbing away at the excess paint and all the little bits of black bleed marks very carefully. It might take some time, but it will give you a better end product, and make sure you clean away the excess paint after. And what you can also use this for, which we'll see in more detail close up later on with the blue layer, is breaking the sharp edges and corners on square blocks. This gives you a very slight radius and gives a more realistic feel to our air vents instead of seeing sharp tape lines. But you can also see now we do have quite a bit of bleeding along that jagged line where we had the white tape, whereas the lines created by the Tamiya tape are razor sharp and straight. So taking forward the lessons we learnt with the black paint, this time we have masked all the important paint lines for our blue paint with the Tamiya tape, and we have used a cheaper tape just to block up the open areas of the body. And this, as you'll see, will give us a perfect crisp line which will minimise the touching up we need to do later. So we have our airbrush, this time with blue Humber paint in it, and what we're going to do is spray the masked blue areas. Again, take nice long strokes and don't let the airbrush stop in one area while spraying. Notice at the end of each stroke, I pull off the trigger, or with a dual action airbrush like this, you can just cut the paint coming out. And this is to stop uneven areas of paint building up at the end of the strokes as you reverse your direction. And as mentioned, try to do nice long lines because it will save lifting off the trigger so much and also reduce the stroke lines along the surface. You can see here we haven't been very careful with our lines and the distance we've sprayed at, so we've got darker areas and lines along the paint, but for the blue layer, because we are going to be putting enough so that you won't be able to see light through it, this doesn't matter. They will get covered up and disappear with the next layers of paint. But as you can see, we've got a pretty good layering considering I've done it around the camera. And finally, as you can see, after a few good layers, we've got this really strong, really bold blue, and the white paint we spray over this won't show through, which is exactly what we want. As we peel off the tape, you can see just how nice and sharp those lines are from the Tamiya tape. And you can also see that there is very little orange peeling in the paint, meaning it was not mixed too thick and it was able to flow nice and flat, although there is still a bit. peeling this tape off, all around the shell we have these perfect lines which will give us an excellent finish. As mentioned, we are going to use our stumpy brush to break these corners. So dip it into your Nitro Fuel and move it along the sharp corners to take these artificial corners created by the tape away. And I see this a lot in other people's cars where they've left this corner on and they could have slightly neatened it up and made it look a whole lot nicer. You don't need to do it a lot and you don't need to take away too much paint, just enough to take that sharp corner off away from the masking tape. Also, where you need to, you can just add a little radius. And you can see there that it's coming out really nicely. Again, you can use this to remove paint marks and bleeding, or areas where the tape didn't quite cover. Now many times when using tape, you might miss little bits that should have been cut away and it blocks the paint getting from the surface. So get a really fine brush or a nice flat brush if you want and just fill in these areas and again layer on the paint. You can see it's still a bit thin here, but we've managed to fill in this little patch. And of course, if you've missed big areas out, you can do the same thing. Now, finally, after all that work, we have reached our final layer, our white paint. For this layer, we will be spraying a bigger area, so we have firstly changed the nozzle and needle size on our brush to a bigger one to get a wider spray pattern. And we have also added a bigger paint cup to the airbrush. One thing you should do, especially if you're painting big complicated areas, is to map out the path you want to follow with the airbrush and make sure it's comfortable to do it in the way that you want. You don't want to start spraying a line and then realize your air hose doesn't reach or you can't get to an area and have to stop mid-stroke. And also make sure before you spray this layer or any layer that the surface is nice and clean with no debris or no overspray from the last layer. And once you're happy and you know your spray pattern, you're ready to start. Now I'm not spraying very evenly, again because the camera is in the way, but you can see the spray pattern of this nozzle is much bigger. Actually, we could have used this nozzle for the other colours too, since we masked everything off. But you can see with only a few strokes we have deposited a nice layer of paint across a wide area. Again, like the blue, take nice long strokes. Put down the first layer, wait a minute or so until the paint is tacky and add the next layer. And just keep building up these layers until you are happy with the thickness. And then the fun part, you can start peeling off all your tape, although we still have some issues to address. Now I like to wait about 6 to 20ish hours for the paint to dry before I peel off the paint. The paint doesn't need to fully dry, but it needs to be hard enough all the way through that it doesn't drip or smudge into the clean areas as you pull the tape off. Now, as you can see here, the tape overlapped into the areas that we want to spray. But actually, this is good for us because we want to come in with a thin brush and create a little radius here. What we've also done, and I think is a nice touch, is leave this clear part of the lights clear, so you can see light through them. One thing which I wish I hadn't have done is paint the top bits of these lights. They look like panda eyes now, and we've got a little bit of overspray there which has come through the crack, but we can wipe this off with some Nitro Fuel. If you see, before we stripped the old paint, these were white, and I think that looked pretty good as well. Another error that we've got is that we didn't clean the surface properly before we painted the white layer, and we've got this black smudge underneath. What we can do here is put some weathering paint or mud all around that vent and cover all of these little bits up and make it look more authentic. You can see here that these little radiuses that we created earlier on the blue have really come up well and really pop and really make this blue layer naturally blend into the body. And you can see here we've finished off these little radiuses on the back, which again just finish off the back end and make it look so much better. What I also want to do later on is to tint these windows with a very slight blue as they are on the real car, and if you want, keep an eye out for pictures of that and other builds on our social media pages. And that's it for this video. I hope you have enjoyed and picked up a few new tips, and I hope you have seen a number of problems that you now know to avoid. You can keep an eye out on our social media pages for some close-ups of the body and some arty shots, and we will be back soon with a third video where we will be restoring the car and mounting this body back onto this chassis. So please rate and subscribe and drop us a comment if you have any questions. Thank you for watching and see you soon.